Holley just released the Terminator X V3 software today. There's a ton of changes, so let's take a look and see what's new. Before we get started, for those of you with the HP and Dominator ECUs running the V5 or V6 software, there's going to be a bunch of stuff that you're going to see in this V3 software that you probably are going to wish that you had. So just be patient. You'll get it along with probably some additional updates in the newest software update for the HP and Dominator ECUs. I can't help but think it's probably going to be V7. So just be patient. It is coming. All right, let's jump into the V3 software and take a look. We'll start off with some of the bigger changes, and keep in mind that this is a beta version. So when they release the production version, it might maybe look a little bit different, or there might be some additional things added on top of what we have here. First up is actually a huge upgrade, as a lot of people have complained about this for years now, and I've even seen people say that they've chosen a different ECU because this feature was missing. But if we look up here at the top, we now have a output test function. When you click on the output test, it gives you this long warning that you are responsible for what you do, and if you start melting components or flooding engines or whatever it is, that Holley is not responsible, so use this at your own risk. Let's take a look at the output test real quick. It's super easy to use. So first thing first is you need ignition power on, and you need to have your USB to CAN cable plugged in, but you do not want to be connected to the ECU. As you can see here, our USB link is not connected, and then we just go to output test. Click OK, that you understand you're going to blow yourself up if you do this wrong. And now you can see all of the lights are flashing and doing the little disco dance on the ECU. Now we can turn the outputs on and off, or we can also pulse them. And I have these 4 outputs connected to a test light, so I'll show you the difference. So if we just toggle them on, they'll stay on. And if we pulse them, you can only pulse one at a time. I like to just set this at 10, and let's try like 200. Sometimes the frame rates for the camera will kind of be a little bit weird. So you see these flashing with your eyes, but not with the camera itself. So let's see if 200 will work for us. Click pulse. Oh yeah, you should be able to see that. And it's that easy. Now you can also do this with all of your ignition outputs, all of your injector outputs, and we also have these fixed outputs right here as well. So there it is. You guys have been asking for this forever, and now you got it. And while we're up here looking at this test outputs function, you can see that some of these have been redesigned. This compare feature here looks like a floor mat now. Up next is another big change, and another one I've seen a million people asking for. If we go to the system ICF, engine parameters, under fuel type, we now have advanced, and it gives you a warning that you need to know what stoich is in order to use this. If we click OK, we can now enter the stoichiometric value of the fuel that we are using. That in itself is a pretty cool upgrade, but what makes this even cooler is now if we go into fuel, target air fuel ratio, we now have this checkbox here for show Lambda. And now we can view our target air fuel and our actual air fuel ratio in Lambda. Now, something to keep in mind with this is it does work a little bit different than most ECUs when it comes to Lambda. As you probably know, the oxygen sensor reads in Lambda and then converts it to air fuel ratio. But with this, the Holley system has been just running air fuel ratio for so long that in order for them to truly run it Lambda, I think they would have to essentially redesign the whole thing. So this is a little bit weird, but it's like the sensor reads Lambda, spits it out into air fuel, and then now we're taking air fuel and then converting it back to Lambda. So you do need to know what the stoichiometric value of the fuel is in order to use this, which one of my favorite parts about Lambda is you traditionally don't need to know that. So just something to keep in mind. So at least if you are used to working in units of Lambda, you now have that option. So next up is more of a huge fix and safety thing, but it's in the same spot. So if you go back to the system ICF, engine parameters, and now if we switch our fuel type, we get this box up that asks if it would like us to convert the target air fuel ratios for the new fuel type. This is huge. So if we click yes, go to fuel, target air fuel, you can see we're on the gasoline scale. So our target air fuel ratios are in the gasoline scale. If we go back, switch this to 85 and we click yes, Go back to our target air fuel ratio. You can see that our targets are now on the E85 scale. Before, it wouldn't ask you or do this update. So if you change the fuel type, the car wouldn't run anymore. So this is a huge update, and this is going to save a lot of people a lot of headaches. Next, if we go down here to this display, and this works for the data logs too. So if we click on this little E, you can see we got some new stuff here up at the top, and we have the ability to search for what we're looking for, hide inactive channels, and if we click on sort, it actually puts everything in alphabetical order. So you can see the numbers are first, and then we got the A's, the B's, so on. And if we click hide inactive, all of the channels that we're not using go away. So it just cuts down on what you have to dig through. And let's just go ahead and use this real quick and type in Lambda. So now you can see that we can display Lambda and we can display target Lambda. So that's pretty cool. And if we click in boost, you can see there's a whole bunch of stuff, but if we hide inactive, now it just pulls up the two things that are actually active, making it way quicker and faster to sort through all of this stuff. So I thought that was pretty cool. Let's see here for the next one. This is a feature that I have talked with Holley about several times, and I use this a ton on other ECUs. Let's connect to the ECU to show this one. So you can see up here we have this new tab that is called Dashboard. If we click on this, it actually brings up all of the different channels. And let's see here, if we move RPM over here, you can see that everything is updating real time. This is invaluable when you are trying to troubleshoot and you just want to kind of see every channel all at once and see if you can't see something freak out that isn't supposed to be freaking out, or it just makes it way easier than having to populate all of the different channels and tabs in the display. And then we also have the ability to show status. So you can see here that there's no air. So as you can imagine, like if you were experiencing a problem and you were looking at this and the car had a weird spot where it was doing something, if you could watch all of this all at the same time and just say that, you know, this channel right here went from no air to air, or whatever, you know, change happens, it makes it that much quicker and easier to diagnose and figure out what's going on. Now, I did already make the suggestion of adding this to the data logs as well. I'll scrub through in the other softwares, like I'll scrub through the log real quick, and you can watch all of these things and see if you happen to watch something change when it's not supposed to. Again, huge time saver. So I don't know if they will introduce this into the data logs or not. Hopefully they will, but even if not, it's awesome to have this just within the normal software. Okay, next up, if we go back to the system ICF, close loop and learn, we now have this advanced tab over here. And what most of these are different ways to delay or kind of keep closed loop turned off. I keep my closed loop limits very, very tight. But for those of you that like to keep your limits at 35,000% or whatever, this will probably help you out quite a bit. Next, if we go to the fuel tab, our fuel graph, if you've used Holley for any length of time, there's been a time where you have moved this graph to be able to see it however you kind of choose to see it. And then you want to go back to your fuel table and look at the actual numerical values. And then you go back to the fuel graph and you want to chop your computer in half with an axe, because everything just moved. So now if we go to however we choose to position this, if we right click, we now have the ability to remember the position. So now if we go to the fuel graph, or fuel table rather, and then we go back to the fuel graph, now it's going to maintain the position that we just kept it at. And if we right click, check that off, then you can do it again, or you can right click, reset position, and it'll go back to the way that it was. This is one that used to drive me nuts, and I've voiced my concern on this one several times. So super happy about this one. This is a big time saver. Next, we'll hop over to the fuel table, and this actually will happen on just about any of them, but we'll look at it here on the fuel table. You can see that the color of the axes here has changed. The default color before was basically the same color as when you highlight it, which made it very difficult to see, especially if like the sun was out. It made it very difficult to see if you actually highlighted it. So now we can actually see what we're highlighting. Colors are still a little bit close, but it's significantly better than it was before. Now, another thing that I asked for, so before you could push Control A and it would highlight everything. But we now also have the ability to check down here and highlight the whole table. Sometimes just using the mouse versus the quick keys is more convenient, so that's pretty cool. What I still would like to see though is if we could click and drag, maybe even if we like held a button, but say that we held down Alt or something and then clicked on this axis and then drug it up like this, if it could highlight everything across and go up like that, that would be another huge help. But hey, this is a very good starting point. Next up, if we go under the transmission tab and click transmission type, you can see we have a whole bunch of new options, 6L80 and 90. A lot of people are going to be happy about. And we also have this racing tab, which if you've used the HP and Dominator ECUs, this is going to be very similar to that. There are a few restrictions. We'll come back to the specifics on the changes here in just a minute. Next up, for those of you that use this feature, you should all personally write a thank you note to Holley for including this in their entry-level system. If we go toolbox, add individual configuration, we now have traction. And we have numerous different types of traction control within the Holley Terminator X software. I never would have expected to see this. So we have wheel slip, which is going to be like the difference between front and rear wheel speed. We have active speed management, which is basically what the HP and Dominator ECUs have. And judging by this activation key down here, I'm assuming that this is going to be a paid upgrade just like it is for the HP and Dominator ECUs. It's very inexpensive for what it is. I think it's like 500 bucks. I don't know if the price for a Terminator X would be different. And we can control drive shaft and crankshaft. And then we also have, and this is a little bit surprising to me, but we have the Davis Technologies TC2 and the Davis Technologies Profiler. So it's a little bit weird to me to buy the most entry-level ECU and then to buy a very advanced, very expensive traction control system, but hey, who am I to judge? If you decide you want to use Davis traction control with your Holley Terminator X, you can now do that. Pretty cool. The next change that we have here is, doesn't look like it's up there. So we go to toolbox, add individual config, boost, default, click on our boost tab. And if we click on control method, we now have open loop duty cycle based. And if we go to boost first time, our table values are now in duty cycle. This was possible previously, but you had to do it through the actual output tab and it just kind of complicated things a little bit. So now we can do this right within the boost control tab, which is nice. And you have a few different options. You boost for speed, time, RPM, and gear. Next up, if we're not on open loop duty cycle, we go to dome control setup. You now see under control setup, we have this type. So for those of you that poop your pants every time you hear the PID value term, we have a drop down for slow, medium, fast, and custom. What's nice is they actually showed you what the values that they're using are for the different drop downs. So that way when you do go to custom and you can set this up yourself, you can kind of compare to what slow, medium, and fast were. So that way, you know, you can plus or minus, you know, however you need that to be. So for those of you that have already been tuning the PID control and understand how that works, probably not going to use any of these, but for those of you that are scared of it, this is a pretty cool upgrade as well. It should simplify things a lot for you. Next up, we'll go back to boost setup and we will change from dome pressure only to boost versus dome. And this is a new boost control strategy altogether. And if we go down, we now have this max PSI setup. And same thing, we have our PID values, or we can just use these predefined ones for us. But if we go into the boost first time table, you can see that we have our dome pressure like we did previously, but now we have a max PSI, which is manifold pressure. So this is pretty cool. The way that this would work is I don't have a dome pressure sensor configured, so it won't let me change any of these values here. But basically, let's say we have a 5-pound wastegate spring and we want to run 10 pounds of dome pressure. We would just, you know, populate the dome pressure to 10. And let's say we only wanted to run a maximum of 15 pounds of boost at the actual intake manifold, not at the dome pressure sensor. Then we would change this max PSI to 15. And then once you make a run, dome pressure goes to 10, but let's say that the manifold pressure decided it wanted to go to 16 or 17 or whatever it was going to go to. If that's the case, then this max PSI setup is going to kick in and it's going to make sure that the maximum intake manifold pressure is lower than what you tell it that you want the maximum to be. I haven't gotten to use this in a car yet, but if it works the way that it's supposed to, it should be really helpful, I think. I'm curious to see how this is going to handle those ramp up spikes on some cars, how just no matter what you go about doing, just between turbo size, converter, engine, everything else, it just mechanically is going to overshoot. I'm curious to see if this will be quick enough to catch those spikes. If so, that'll be really nice. Next, we're going to hop over into the data log, and there's some upgrades here that kind of fix some things that used to drive me nuts a little bit. So to start off with, like I mentioned before, we have the ability to search and hide and all of that good stuff, which is awesome. But probably the biggest update here is if we click on something, We now have the ability to change the line color, thank God. And even better than that is it will save the line color, so you don't have to rechange it each time you go into data log. So this is a super helpful update. So you can see if we change this from red to blue, click OK, click OK. Now our line just changed from red to blue. Next thing, we have a couple of toggles up here. We can reset everything back to the default, and this toggle off, which will turn all the lines off here, but keep everything populated over here. Can't say I see myself ever using that one, but at least it's there. But one big update is with the quick keys, and this is something that I've been asking for a while too. But if we hold Control and S, we can now toggle off the comparison data log. So having the comparison data logs is a feature that I use all of the time. I actually might not even consider using Holley if it didn't have it, so it's important to me. But you can see with all of this stuff on here, it gets really kind of clunky and hard to read pretty quickly. And if you close the comparison data log, then you have to reopen it and kind of do everything. So just being able to toggle that off is huge to me. I'm really happy that they added this. Oh, I guess if we go here into the edit views, we also have this checkbox down here for show line colors. So if you click on that, it'll show you what color each one of the lines are. So pretty helpful. Oh, another quick key that is, again, super helpful. It's not in the data log, but kind of goes with it. If we go back to our fuel table here, go to data log, activate overlay. This is going to give you this green kind of line of where your data log took place along with where the cursor currently is. So before, if you wanted to turn this off and on, you would have to click this checkbox, but now we have this Alt plus O quick key. So if we just hold down Alt and press O, it toggles that on and off. I'm going to use this nonstop, so another awesome feature. Next, if we go to Toolbox and Preferences, we have some additional things here with log files and error retries and things like that, so that stuff will be helpful. And the next one is pretty cool, especially for those of you that are doing remote tuning. You're gonna like this one a lot, but if we go to File, Email Global File, and let's see here, we'll just save this. Here is the new update. Would you also like to send the open log file? So you're gonna get the email with not only the global file, but the open log file at the same time. This is gonna save everybody a lot of headache and frustration for sure. All right, let's head over to the README file, or whatever you wanna call it, and just make sure I didn't forget to go over anything. All right, again, you can see here that this is beta, so some of this stuff might change. For the wizard, there's been some updates for some different engines. Obviously, that means that the software is now going to support some different engines as well. We went over outputs, we went over the view all channels. The ECU is now going to ask you if you want to save files and the things that need to happen in order to do like firmware updates and stuff. So this is going to help with a lot of confusion, as it's just going to do it for you. So this is nice. I said we'd go over the transmission control stuff a little bit later, so here we are. So the racing type is designed for like air shifters, and let's see, we got up to 8 speeds of shifter control, 2 spool assist valves, 1 dump valve. It does not allow for racing style converter lockup, which if you've got a $40,000 lockup in the car, you're probably not using Terminator X anyways. And again, Lenco Liberty is not supported, as you really wouldn't expect anybody to be running that with a Terminator X. This is pretty cool. There's some manual transmission types now. So the reverse lockout and the speedo are gonna work. We got GM T56, F-body Magnum 17-tooth VSS, Ford T56, Tremec Magnum 12-tooth VSS, and Tremec TKX 5-speed 12-tooth VSS. We now have the 6L80, 6L90E support. You will need the Holley harness and the F5 flash device. And we now have a CAN 2, but this is only going to be available for the transmission controller. We went over the new boost control options. We went over the traction control options. I guess worth noting here is that you can use any combination of the traction control types, so that's a little bit unique. Went over the closed loop advanced parameters. We now have control for PWM alternators that are supported by Holley with their harness. Oh, I didn't go over this one. Global minimum and maximum timing. So if we hop back over to the software real quick, system ICF, ignition parameters. You can see here we now have a global timing limit. So if when you're on the 2-step and you're commanding it to pull a bunch of timing, it will only go below a certain amount, or any other modifiers or whatever else, no matter what you're telling it to do anywhere else in the software, it's never going to go above or below these values. I almost feel like maybe a above and below X amount of TPS might be a nice touch for this, because as of right now, the max timing you might want for cruising around versus the max amount of timing that you might want for full throttle are going to be pretty different. So either way, it's there if you decide that you want to use it, but keep an eye on this. Make sure it doesn't bite you in the butt. Make sure you don't put 20 here and forget about it, and then later you want to run 25 degrees and you can't figure out why. Storage went over that. Staging output now has a single advanced enable criteria, and this one here is pretty cool. Fan output is engine running only option, which is nice. That way the fan's not running after you turn the car off. Went over all the logging stuff. There's a whole bunch of updates here for the VVT and the direct injection stuff. I don't do a lot with that, so feel free to read that if you use that more often than I do. There's been some additional updates to the transmission. Again, I would encourage you to read through all of this. If I sit and read it all to you, this video would be 4 hours long. And here are our new applications. So we got a bunch of the LT stuff, some different fuel system drop down stuff, new fuel injectors, new subtypes, new engines, ignition types, the usual stuff. There are a bunch of hotkey options. I think I showed you the two that I'm the most excited about, but now you can basically get to any table by holding Alt, and on most of these it looks like it's basically like the first letter of the table that you're trying to get to. So I like hotkeys, that's pretty helpful. Again, this is beta, so there's a few that haven't been all the way updated yet. They renamed some map sensors to make things a little bit easier to know what you're clicking on. Ability to check and view in Lambda. The fuel type fix, that's a big one. Upgraded the AFR. Instead of 1 decimal point, there's now 2. So you're looking at like a 1470 instead of a 14.7. Injector end angle table now has advanced mode that unlocks the axis to be user adjustable. This is nice because now you don't have to burn up a custom table if you want to do injector end angle a specific way. A couple new sensors, the race pack vacuum and AEM 12 position. And it looks like we went through all of this other stuff. Yeah, so we covered all that. And just like any software or firmware updates for anything, it doesn't matter if it's an ECU or a camera or an airplane or whatever, but there's some software bug fixes and some firmware updates that fix some different things. And ironically, I have never experienced a single one of these errors. So those of you maybe having some issues, hopefully this will take care of it. So there it is, Terminator X V3 software in a nutshell. If you are still overwhelmed by this Holley software and you would like to learn more about it, click on the video on the screen right now and you can learn more about my Holley EFI online training course. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.